Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Council for Social Justice Town Hall meeting gathering as we continue our quest to help, aid, and assist those who are in need and hope for social justice. Please give yourself a round of applause. I am the treasurer of this organization. My name is Sean Hubbard, and on behalf of our president, Ms. Natasha St. Bernard, our senior advisor, Rex Jones, our secretary, Tony Skerritt, and our vice president, Ms. Shanice Felder, we welcome you. Tonight's subject matter is, once again, a very sensitive one. We all know that we all have certain issues when it comes to social justice that are near and dear to our hearts, but though there are some situations that may touch us more closely than others, all those potential issues are to be taken seriously, sensitively, and with respect. And with that being said, I'd like us all to bow our heads as we start this thing off with a word of prayer. Father God, we come to you right now asking that everything tonight be done to your glory and to enrich and enhance the minds of the people. We know and believe that change is a possibility, but that change can only happen through you. So we ask that you be in the midst tonight, God, and help each and every person, every mind and every heart be enriched and nourished by the information that comes forth on this evening. The Council for Social Justice thanks you, our guests thank you, our panelists thank you, and we collectively thank you. In Jesus' name I do pray. Amen.
Amen.
With that being said, I'd like to introduce each speaker and ask them to give a brief 5-minute introduction of themselves, a biography, if you will. First and foremost, I'd like to call and bring attention to Gregory Payne.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I like to be referred to as Greg. Only my parents call me Gregory and Rex Jones. But anyway, I hail from Williamsburg, Virginia, way in the South, and I was formally educated there at University of Virginia and James Madison University, where I did my undergrad work in vocal performance and music education. And I ended up here in New York City to do graduate work at Nyack College and NYU, where I received a master's in education and special education with an emphasis on creative arts therapies and interventions. And I did a Master of Social Work at New York University Silver School of Social Work. I also have a background in social justice as a proud member of the LGBTQ community. I am the former artistic director of the Lavender Light Black and People of All Colors Lesbian and Gay Gospel Choir. I'll tell you how relevant that was for people facing being rejected by their families and their religions. So I have grown a real passion for supporting the needs of the marginalized, such as the LGBTQ community, and invalidating environments. So currently I am a training specialist and community coordinator with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. I'm very, very happy to be in collaboration with one of your members, Mr. Rex Jones, which brings me here tonight. But in my capacity as a training specialist, I have trying to help the mayor and First Lady and their Thrive initiatives to train 250,000 New Yorkers in mental health first aid. Being LGBTQ, in that community, we do know that they are at a very high risk of mental illness and of being victims. And yes, I'm just going to go ahead and say, victims of stigma, victims of abuse victims, of not being able to live life to the fullest. So we're in the, on the battlefield trying to increase that capacity to live a happy and fruitful life without the intervention of people who believe we don't deserve it. So I'm still on that battlefield, and I'm just joining the, I just became a teaching and research fellow of the Suzanne Peck School of Social Work at University of Southern California, where I'm involved in their distant learning program, and will be joining their faculty as a doctoral candidate. So, and I'm old, and and I'm still trying to do my thing. So it's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, our next panelist for the evening. Professor right here at Mercy College. He is our own. I say our own because he was a professor of mine as well. He is the one and only Dr. Jack Simons.
Thank you so much. I'm just grateful you've put this together. This is an area that's very important to me. I'm here tonight to talk about some big issues, and I know that Rex, you put together a great line of questioning. And the questions that we'll talk about tonight are questions that have sort of fueled my commitment to my community, the LGBTQ plus community. I pursued my PhD at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. It took me to Arizona, where I worked with LGBT people, talking about their life stories, learning about minoritized identities, minority stress, and so many other things that I felt I needed to learn more about with regards to, of course, myself, but also those who I provide counseling to, who I have provided counseling to in schools, community settings, and other places. When I pursued my PhD, I studied school counseling as well as LGBTQI plus issues, and that's part of my mission with regards to being at Mercy, having come here to train counselors about working with all types of underrepresented groups, but of course, always making sure that there's the voice of the sexual and gender minority people in the equation, which we know throughout the years has sometimes been present and sometimes has not been present. And I think we'll talk about some of that tonight. Happy to be here, grateful to be here, and I look forward to sharing more with all of you.
Thank you for those words, Dr. Jack. We'd also like to add that Dr. Jack is also the faculty advisor for the Counselors for Social Justice. That being said, we're going to call on our last 5-minute bio from our third panelist. We're thankful that they're in attendance, and without any further ado, Lamel Smithers. I want to make sure all right, Lamel Smithers.
Hi, thank you. I think this is an honor and privilege to be asked to be a part of this panel. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm the youngest out of 7. I'm the youngest female out of my other 5 siblings. I've been working in addiction, in the field of addiction for 18 years. I have a KSAC and a master's in social work. I never really focused on LGBT, but I just look at how far we had came and how far we still have to go. I'm grateful for this panel because it say, wow, we are being heard. You know, we are being heard, and it's becoming more acceptable to society, but not as much. But like I said, we still came a long way, and I look forward to being a voice to those in the darkness who's being discriminated and face violence every day because of their sexual orientation, as I have myself. And thank you.
As we move forward with the balance of this program, I'd like to remind us all that we all have different, like I said earlier, different things that we deal with as it comes to social justice and social injustices. My social injustice may not be yours. I am not a homosexual, so I may not understand your struggle, but I'm educated. I'm educating myself to understand. Or you may not be black, so you may not understand my struggle. But whatever struggle it is, we are here to work together and find a resolution that we all might live on a better planet, right? So with that being said, let's take one moment to just bow our heads and give a moment of silence to all those who have suffered from any kind of injustice whatsoever. Thank you. And with that being said, I'd like to take the time to introduce my co-host for the evening. She is a dedicated soldier as it pertains to social justice and changing social injustice. I'm proud to call her a sister in the struggle. And she is also the president of the Counselors for Social Justice. She and I will be co-hosting this event. She is the one and only Ms. Natasha St. Bernard.
Thank you, Sean. I want to welcome you guys for, getting this out there for us to brighten up our world, because a lot of people today still believe that we are shut out and we're not part of. And I want to thank you guys for being part of today. I want to start with our first question. We will begin, the psychological stress when a person decides that coming out to family, friends, and even people of faith is more important to them than to others. So tell me, what do you think about that question? Describe the psychological stress when a person decides that coming out to family, friends, even people of faith is more important to them than to others. So, in other words, how difficult is it, or how difficult can it be to come out to others? What is the struggle? What is the stressors? What can actually happen when someone say, "Hey mom, hey dad," or "Hey pastor, I've been having these feelings and I think I like the same sex"?
Well, the coming out process is by far one of the biggest stressors that LGBTQ plus people will face. That journey is different for everyone. Most of the time, because of stigma, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure, a lot tonight, but people choose not to.
Right.
That's the choice. I'm not coming out. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to prescribe to the what's that? Don't ask, don't tell situation.
Right.
But people who find themselves so actualized that they really do need to identify themselves, it is a process. And it's still something very difficult to deal with. Through my own work with my own self-awareness, I try to wear it on you see, I got on a skirt so nobody will have to ask me. Do you see what I'm saying? You know what you're dealing with when you see me. And that I found was a coping mechanism, because it was very uncomfortable to hear, "Greg, are you gay?" Right. No, I used to. But it is an extremely difficult thing to do. And a lot of times, really, with the help of support, counseling, validating environments, it becomes easy. But it is a difficult thing to do. And perhaps one of the biggest stressors that we face. Nobody who's straight has to come out. "Oh, mom and dad, I'm straight." Think about that, right? So that's what makes us marginalized. That's what makes our lives special. And either we face it the right way or we don't. But if we don't, because of stigma, there's help. And there are things that you can do to help you come out. I didn't really come out, and I have to tell this story, because I was already counseling, a big mentor, a big role model for a lot of LGBTQ students that I had at Parsons School of Design when I was director of opportunity programs there. And of course, there's safety when you know that there's someone like you. That's why identity matters, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I counsel, and I found I was helping everybody else with their coming out process, and I wasn't coming out to my own parents because of the stigma, because I came from a very, very conservative, I'm a preacher's kid. My father's was pastor, he's gone on to glory now, but he was pastor of one of the biggest black churches in Williamsburg, Virginia. So I had that family pressure, I had that, but even though, you know, I was involved in activities that was stereotypically gay. I was a cheerleader, I was popular, I was breaking gender rules. I didn't care because of my own self-strength. Not everybody had that, but I said all of that to say I had to come out I made a ceremony out of it. And do you know what my father, and I did it around Thanksgiving time, where everybody was home. I played this portrait that Lavender Light had done of me, and interviewing me in my life and the struggles between gayness and spirituality. Mm-hmm. They did a big interview with me that was beautiful. So I played that for my whole family. And I would have my speech all ready to walk out. If you don't love me, you can kiss my, you know, I was prepared for that. I was prepared to fight. But I played this, and my big patriotic father said at the end of and I said at the end, are there any questions with my arrogant, are there any questions? And my father, who I expected to kick me out, said, Gregory, do you think this is news to us? And from that day on, I felt validated. Mm-hmm. Everybody laughed. Everybody doesn't have those protective factors. But I said that everybody's journey is unique. And if you know someone, or if you are that someone, it's better to not walk around love how God, if you believe in God, has made you. Because I'm sure with all the stigma, all of us didn't go, ooh, I think I'm going to be gay and be persecuted the rest of my life. God made, this is my belief, God made you that way. Tell the whole world about it, because they will appreciate it. And those who don't, that's not your problem. Whose problem is that? Yeah. And that's my take on coming out.
Thank you, Gregory.
Well, I know for me, I don't even think I ever came out like that. You know, as a kid, I was always tomboyish, so I always ran with the boys. You know, I did boy things, you know, ride bikes, climb trees, play on the basketball team. When my sisters and I was taking dance class, I was taking karate classes and boxing. And as time, I was a young adolescent, and as I got older, you know, my first girlfriend, I remember when we was young, we used to play these games called like RC, run, catch, and kiss and all that. So I used to run and say, I'm gonna be the man, I'm gonna be the man. And I used to kiss my friends. Then we used to play with dolls, you know, play doctors, and I always was the male doctor. And my family, they just embrace it. You know, they embrace it because they love me. You know, did my mother agree with it? No, she didn't agree with it. Was it a moment where she felt shameful? Yes, but she loved me enough to accept me as a child, and my siblings loved me enough to accept me as they sibling. So the only discrimination that I had was outside of my family, which I never understood how my sexual orientation affects someone else's life. I remember this young lady I was speaking to, really dating. Her man beat me up. I didn't even know she had a man. So I was victimized throughout the course of my life. Even in the store, like, oh, you want to be a man? This guy punched me in my face one time because he said I wanted to be a man. I didn't even know him. Like, you have a problem with my sexual orientation. So when people do come out, and I see why some people is afraid of coming out because of the discrimination and the stigma and the violence that come along with it. I throughout my career, I had counseled people coming out, and it's a difficult task if you come from a family. Like my family do have a religion background, but still in all, I go to church, and it was times I went to church because my mother, she's a little ill right now, so I escort her to church. And I remember the church she was actually involved in, they told her, they say, don't you know your daughter is gay and she's not welcome in our church? Mm-hmm. And my mother says, my daughter's not welcome, then I'm not welcome. And I have known people that actually family disown them because of their sexual orientation as an adolescent coming up. Like today, we have so much information, we have so much help, we have so much awareness about LGBT and transy too, that would, and is more receptible. Or on TVs, you see same sex, you know, so people is being more educated to it. Do everyone agree with it? No. So coming out for me wasn't really an issue with my family or my friends, because I hung out with everyone that was a part of the lifestyle I was living. So, you know, it was easier for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamel.
So I thought about this question. I was reminded that everybody's got their own path. They decide when it's time to tell. Mm-hmm. And it can be young, and it can be older. I was sort of in the middle. I definitely didn't come out when I was a teenager. I knew when I was 5 years old. There was no question. The question was, then how do you handle it? How do you then travel the path and do what you think you're supposed to do? And ultimately, I decided that I'd do what my parents would want me to do, but ultimately, beyond that, I knew that that wouldn't work for me. And there are 3 generations we've learned, as I've studied some of this stuff, at the intersection of my professional and personal life, that there are 3 major generations that have sort of been affected within LGBTQI+. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the Civil Rights Stonewall era. They have a very unique experience. And then we've got the HIV/AIDS era folks. They have a unique experience. And then you've got the same-sex marriage people. Mm-hmm. And they don't even know that the other 2 existed. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I was there in the late 80s and early 90s when people were dying. Mm-hmm. And for me to say what I truly was to the world and begin at a younger age to then move forward would have been something that I wouldn't want to be part of, because there were people dying, including a gay uncle who passed away of HIV/AIDS in my life. It was very close to home. And I knew that I had to continue to work through that. I ultimately came out and decided that I would be an openly gay guy, you know. I don't encourage other people to come out if they don't want to come out. I simply put myself out there as a resource, as a professor who's committed to our counseling profession and education. And now I'm that role model, right? Mm-hmm. But we need to respect, and that's what I want to share in the context of my story, is that we respect people where they're at on the path. Mm-hmm. We want more people to be visible, yes, because we know if people know we exist and they see that we're just people that go to the store and buy bread and buy milk and go home most of the time, that we're pretty normal folks. But the reality is people do want to go on this path slower, and there are consequences to that. And until people can get to the point, like I was in my life, to say, I don't care what people think, there's still people out there that say, I do care. And it's a part of coping and identity development at the same time. And there's tension in this process. So the way people cope is part of the equation that plays into how they come out. If they ultimately come out, like the whirlwind, like you've talked about. Some people I still know are out if they're asked, but they don't necessarily have to put it on their sleeve per se. And there are different reasons for that, which I believe we're going to get into later today with some other questions about the topic. So I think it's important to know that along my path I had tiaras put in my mailbox in the middle school where I was a school counselor. Was there a note on them telling me who left them behind? No. I had a lead pencil slammed into my leg when I was in high school. People just laughed, you know. Who knows what it had to do with? I always knew I was a little different. I think some other people did too. So there are things, speed bumps I had along the way, in addition to being part of that cohort, that really make my story, I think, unique. And I can sit up here today and be very proud of who I am, and encourage people to lean into coming out, because we know full well if people do stay closeted for too long, it can eat away at their mental health and wellness. And we see this in the context of depression, and then ultimately perhaps suicide,
substance use
and abuse, and these things. And we'll talk more about it tonight. So those were some thoughts that I had as you proposed that question.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
So being the fact that you guys did touch on mental health, the next question is going to go to Sean, and he's going to emphasize more on that topic as well.
Absolutely. Something was troubling, obviously. It's a long time ago, 40-some-odd years, but in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed the diagnosis of homosexuality from the second edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Do you think that that stigma played a part in the listing of homosexuality being put in the manual in the first place? In other words, being a homosexual was almost, in a way, called like a disease or a mental setback or a mental illness. It was taken out in '73, so it's almost 45 years ago. But it being there in the first place, what are your thoughts on that? And does it tie into the stigma?
May I carry on? I'll carry on and just simply say that I thought, I would think so, that it's been stigmatized, and therefore it was pathologized in the DSM, right, by the psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And that was through 1972, as you've said. And you know, when you're not part of the mainstream, you know, people question that and wonder what that's about. So I don't think there's any question about stigma not being part of, you know, stigma is part of the equation. And the idea that they had to discuss that it would be removed from the APA is a clear sign that they considered it to be pathology. That people who were attracted to the same sex were people who were not, they were people who had a mental illness, that they were, you know, again, they were pathologized. These were sick people.
Well, the whole question of stigma goes back centuries. And actually, it becoming a part of the DSM-3 or considered a pathology was really done as a way to save gay people, because back in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, it broke anti-sodomy laws, and they were killing.
Yes.
They were killing us. So in order to get people off of getting their heads cut off, there were a few psychiatrists and researchers who said, well, let's make this a disease so that we can get the homosexuals off on insanity. So stigma goes way, way back about how people have hated and have been disgusted by and have been afraid of people who are identified or and I like to say can't help but show. I can't help but show mine. I can put on a suit and tie and you can tell I'm still gay. Some people can hide it, but some of us can't, and therefore are big victims. And if this were 200 years ago, I could have my head cut off. So therefore it became pathologized to actually help and save LBG, but that did not cause the stigma to go away, because it having an illness or it being listed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual just made people go, oh, they really are crazy, and gave the legal and gave business and all kinds of commerce the license to discriminate and marginalize. So I'm happy that it was removed by the DSM-3R, but it still carried some, you know, it just got lowered from being a social affective or social pathological personality disorder down to being sexually deviant.
Right.
Who wants to be sexually deviant? That's not fair. So people looked at it, and by I think the early 90s or so, early 90s, has been completely removed from the DSM-5 as a mental illness. That doesn't say that gay, LGBTQ plus persons are not at a big risk of mental illness that goes into other reasons, but the fact of us being gay does not automatically qualify us with 5 of the 9 of some criteria for having a mental illness.
As far as Greg was saying, this go all the way back to the Romans and the Greek times that we've been fighting this here stigma. Even though it was removed from the DSM, but in countries they still being crucified, people were still being murdered and killed for their sexual orientation. It's just United States, we got a little better with it. As far as it being a mental illness, I look at, first of all, we got to look at who write the DSM. A lot of that stuff written in the DSM doesn't pertain to certain cultures or certain categories. So the purpose of them putting it in there till this day, I don't know why, and I don't understand. Like they put everything else into it. The same time as they was putting same sex as a mental illness because you like someone, they was putting people who was going through withdrawals of alcohol in mental institutions too, and they was killing them and crucifying them. And I mean, it's a shame that because a person choose to be who they are or choose to live this life, they have to be crucified and killed. And as you were saying that, I could see it as a safeguard to put a name to it, catalog it as disease for medical purpose and safety purpose. But now it's no longer in the book, and the stigma and the violence and the discrimination is still there. Just got a little better without it.
And if the truth be told, to add on what you're saying, it's not the folks that's going to be reading the DSMs are not the problem.
Right.
I mean, who even know whether, unless you're in social work or if you're in psychology, who the hell even knows what the DSM 2, 3, 4, and 5 is? We've got to change. We've got to change our environment. I mean, the science community will change as it goes on. They're getting ready to come out with DSM-6. Some other disorder is going to be removed.
Well, I'd like to add that perhaps some of you do know that we've got the gender dysphoria is still present in DSM, and because of it, there is this debate, like we've talked about. We need this in here to get these people help.
Yes.
But on the flip side, it's still in a book that's a pathology-based book. So we're getting two messages here. And as we know, as of yesterday, they're trying to erase transgender people at the highest levels of our federal government. So if there's anything that you take today, keep yourself informed about what's going on and how our federal government is now spinning things and switching things up in the context of gender minority issues as well. It goes all back to that 72 thing.
Transgender bias is a whole nother thing.
And I think
mean, LGBTQ gender conforming people are actually a part of a privileged class now.
Right.
But those of us on the transgender spectrum, we still have a lot of stigma, despite all of the HB2, HB1, these laws that are going through to protect us. Look at what Trump is doing now.
yes.
Yeah.
Trying to have us not even be defined.
Right.
Oh my God. So I think that the discussion is more relevant to transgender bias because LGBTQ, I mean, just being gay and straight, despite it really, we have to look at the stigma of transgender bias
That's true.
and where that intersection happens. Because if you're black, if you're gay, if you're on the transgender spectrum, if you're poor and need social services, if you need to rely on the benevolence of your religion, we got a long ways to go, but we just got to face it. And I just want to, in today, for us to really look at the plight of transgender people. Without protective factors, they are at a higher risk of mental illness, and they are higher risk of suicide and of killing themselves.
That's true.
And I just don't want to, as someone who's doing their research in transgender bias, I just don't want us to get lost in the sauce, because transgender bias or the issues facing transgenders, their worries aren't the same.
That's true.
Because not only are they carrying their special biases, it's towed in by a macro system that can get them lost in the sauce. And oh, you're getting benefits and attention. There's a lot of anti-gay laws that will protect you. But the long and short of it, because of stigma again, they're still at risk for getting jumped.
That's true.
I can't walk up the middle of Fordham Road with my long skirt on. I could, but I'm gonna be nervous.
That's true.
And then I'm big, and I walk around. Don't let this pocketbook and pearls fool you. I will throw you down just if you come from. Do you see what I'm saying? I've had to work. I've had to. If I had to. I'm sorry, but it's important to be real about this because it can really save a life.
Greg, I did want to point out something because you touched on transgender, and now we have neutral bathrooms. Now transgenders are actually being identified as he, she, her, him, which I think is very important. I wanted to touch on that before we get into the next question. How important it is to actually allow a transgender be called Rebecca when he's actually a Robert. Because
it depends on whether you believe that if a person is defined by their sign sexuality or the sign that they really identify with. Science has shown, and research has shown, that it is important for people to be able to express their identity or socially locate. I would really advise people to look at the work of D. Watts Jones from the Ackerman Institute, who writes on social location and how important identity is, the way we see it, which is connected to gender dysphoria, as you know, doctor. But the way to deal with gender dysphoria, which is a disorder that you've heard of the concept of, I'm a man on the outside, but I'm a woman in the inside. That's or I'm a woman on the outside, but I'm a man in the inside, and there are gradations of that. The issue becomes identity matters. I think it's important in your counseling. I think it's important for you to have people, just like you said, to socially locate and to put it in an order, because I'm different things. I'm gay, I'm gender non-conforming, I'm a staunch God-loving Christian, I'm talented. I'm black, I said that. I have social economic status. However you look at yourself can inform how happy you will be. Because at the end of the day, it's about being able to live life at its fullest. Heterosexual people, despite all the things that life brings, at least has that as a protective factor. So as I said, go into the Ackerman and see her lecture. Is that mine? Oh, I'm so sorry. See her lecture on social location and how that happens. I thought I turned my phone off. I'm sorry.
And I'd like to add just, this past year here at Mercy College, our college supported learning about the school and career experiences of intersex people from a retrospective space, meaning they're thinking about how it all went down for them growing up. And one of the most difficult studies to do working with my students. And what I can tell you is, I know we're short on time, but another group of people I don't want you to forget when you leave tonight would be intersex people. We have been collecting data in the States, formerly at the University of Minnesota since 1940. Intersex people who are biologically people born as male and female, oftentimes with genital issues. And the big thing they talk about in their stories, in addition to lack of community and all these other things that have been brought up, are the numerous surgeries they undergo when they're in elementary school, in middle school, and high school. So it's another big thing that's out there. And I've also been told recently by a researcher that every month, there are several hundred forms of intersex people. Every month, there's still people being born, and they have no name for the medical condition for what this person is born with. And we now know, and I think it's in Germany and in California and some other places, we now have X as something that can go on a birth certificate in addition to the M and the F. And the reason that's important is when these people begin to apply for example, passports, there has to be a gender in there. And there's been a lot of problems associated with supporting the intersex people too. So I just wanted to add more information in the context of our discussion so that folks would leave tonight also thinking about them as well, because they're out there and they also have been, frankly, left off the paperwork for decades, many, many decades.
And they don't even speak about that, the intersex. It's like I went through the whole school of social work and we never spoke of the intersex.
Yeah, some of the most progressive communities who are supporting trans people, sexual minority people, just don't talk about it. It's just sort of forgotten. So it's sort of there, but it's not talked about enough. So
Don't ask, don't
I have a friend that was born like that.
Yeah. So thanks for letting me share that as well.
Thank you, Jack. Moving along, question number 3. According to the Williams Institute, there are more than 1 million LGBTQ African Americans currently living in the United States, with approximately 3.7% of all African American people identifying as LGBTQ. LGBTQ African Americans are disproportionately young and disproportionately female, and nearly 1/3 of all African American same-sex couples are raising children. Economically, insecurity, although economic conditions in U.S. are improving, LGBTQ African Americans continue to be economically disadvantaged because of discrimination, housing insecurities, lack of quality, affordable health care, and fewer education opportunities. Do you believe that services and opportunities for European LGBTQ in America are equal for people of color who are LGBTQ when it comes to housing, employment, and job promotions?
Rex, you know, through your work with GMHC, how fortunate and how privileged LBGT, particularly gay white men, are. It's just clear. As in the middle of the AIDS crisis in the late 80s and 90s, we were able to see a mobilization. We were able to do studies that compared the people of gay community with the majority community. That was a time that, and I tell you that a really big protective factor is that a lot of lesbian and gay people of color were beginning to rely on finding resources for itself, and therefore the liberation movement called Beam and the Church of, I don't know if you remember, in the 90s, there was a big, and some of y'all probably wasn't even born then, but back in the 90s, there was a surge to find safe places, to find ways to lift our community. And I was fortunate during that period, during the 90s, to be a part of a movement called the Lavender Light Black and People of All Colors, Lesbian and Gay Choir. We found it important to identify ourselves as black because we found that there are a lot of other cultures who wanted to take that away from the African American culture. I was able to keep, for those of you who was kicked out of your churches, who had to sit in the sermon and listen to the preacher say, you going to hell, those of y'all who sleeping with the same sex, those of you who were marginalized were trying to find places to strengthen themselves, because when you don't have protective factors, your whole biopsychosocial capacity decreases. Therefore, you start doing bumps in the clubs, you start drinking, you start getting in abusive relationships. There are a lot of gay men who are being taken advantage by a straight trade. Let's talk about that for a minute. Right. People on the DL, okay, who can't show themselves, who make the excuse, I can be gay for pay. Therefore, they was taking AIDS back to their girlfriends, learning how to be gay in jail. Some of it is real, some of it isn't. But it is a very real thing in the African American community. And I think that we should just try to, another reason for us to try to deactivate the stigma. So men and women can feel good about who they are. They don't have to sneak around, creep. You know, I don't have to have, you know, my best friend's boyfriend knocking on my door. Come on now, I mean, I'm not lying. Yeah, and I've always had, my best friends have always been very attractive women. So it's just a reality. Just like I say in my mental health first aid, you gotta identify it, you gotta see it and accept it for what it is. And look at the pros and cons of it. Most of the time we don't deal with it.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I can talk about it from a gay white man's perspective, and it shocks me. It shocks me because it was my friends as a child who were people of color who validated this gay young boy. And those guys and those girls were my friends and have remained my friends throughout my life. And then when I meet gay men and others, lesbian women, but we're talking about predominantly gay men from my sphere at this point, who objectify people of color who are gay and things like that, I can tell you that I raise my voice and I say something, and I encourage others to do the same within the white male gay community. But it's not happening, and it's not fully present like it should be. So these are discussions that are reflected even at the mainstream level. You know, we talk about white privilege and all of this stuff, and it seeps all the way down to the core of the LGBT communities. And I can sit up here today saying I've read a lot of books, I've spoke a little bit, talked to some students along the way, and it still befuddles me why there's a cadre or a group of white gay men out there who don't understand that the experience of gay people who are people of color as well, it's exactly, not exactly, extremely different. And therefore, we are responsible from a majority racial place to give those voices and continue to put those voices out there. So, yeah, I just want to share that. I've sit up here in shock just talking about it and thinking about it with you. And I just wanted to reflect that back from a white guy's perspective.
And I just want to add this. There's also a disparity between the relationship between lesbians and gays. You know what I mean? It's different for gay women than it is for me. I may be not privileged or disadvantaged as a gay person, but as a male, I'm privileged.
Right.
There are doors for me that I can even open with my dress on because I'm male, as opposed to, the issues that face lesbians or transgender males.
Thank you for mentioning that. That we do work around LGBT issues that include the voices of women is also very important because, again, they're absent just as much as those who are people of color in the community as well.
Now, Mel, would you like to elaborate more?
As they were speaking, I was thinking of the disadvantage as African American LGBT. In our communities, we don't have as much support as Manhattan. Different classes, different economic status, even in the workplace. At my job, my workplace, even though I work in a addiction center, it still is a disadvantage there at times when they ask me to take a female urine, and some of the females be like, no, I don't want to take my urine, I get someone else. So it's a disadvantage at times when it comes to the gay women, aggressive gay women, than feminine gay women. They have more of an advantage than the gay women of my status and my nature. And far as the men's, like in Bed-Stuyvesant, they just put a LGBT community, which they didn't have the information to give us. They don't have a lot of protective factories in certain communities, so we suffer. They don't have a lot of, and they say that we have laws that protect us, but we really don't. Those laws is in place at times for certain classes and certain privilege. They still face discrimination for housing, employment, child care. So when you're talking about the Europeans and African Americans in the United States, it's totally different. I don't know what it's like in their country. I know what it's like here, or other states. I know what it's like right here in New York. California too. California have a lot of things come from California to New York. So a lot of the information comes from there up here. Like now that I'm glad they begin to acknowledge it in schools and in colleges. So that gives us a more of an opportunity. People have to really go out there and search for the research and for the things that's offered to us.
Thank you, Mel.
And while we're talking about the African American community, the homophobia is at a level that exceeds other communities.
Yes.
So we are at a real disadvantage in the African American community.
Within ourselves,
Yes, within our own, where we're supposed to get protection, where our protection is. You got to get to know us to really, really ameliorate or mitigate the homophobia that is so embedded in our community. And it starts young. It starts young. That's why diversity training is very important at that baby's age. First and second, third grade, we're beginning to give diversity training. In my work with the Gender Family Project at the Ackerman, which is a project that helps young transgender children, and I mean beginning at the age of 3 and 4, where families are already recognizing transgender issues, getting the child to be in play groups with other kids, support groups for the parents who really are freaked out that 5-year-old Chris now wants to be Christina, and finding the resources to really recognize that this could affect a person's mental health so much so that by the age of 12 or 13, they don't want to kill themselves.
Yeah.
LGBTQ adolescents and those in late latency period are at 4 times the risk of not only attempting but completing suicide. Can you imagine how that is disproportionately high in the African American community?
That's true.
Why? Because they don't have the protective factors, because they're not privileged to be able to come to a fancy clinic downtown on 23rd and 5th with wealthy families who can get them the mental health treatment and massage that they need. The long and short of it is that homophobia keeps us from looking at it, defining it, and therefore getting the help to someone who faces that kind of stress. As privileged as I was, as talented as I was as a child, I still have trauma from an invalidating environment. But thank God, I have found treatment. I don't know what I would do without Sue Bloland, my therapist. I'm very open. I'm in therapy. I'm a therapist. I should be in therapy.
That's right.
We should all have a supervisor who keeps us self-aware and helps us with our blind spots. Because believe it or not, we all, whether we gay, straight, in somewhere in between, we all have blind spots, don't we?
That's right.
So, and it's about being aware of where they are so you can see the light.
That's right, Greg.
And be happy.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to turn the next question over to Sean.
This question is based in violence and harassment. I'll give you a little bit of background before I go into the actual question. According to the 2014 report on hate violence against the LGBTQ and HIV-affected communities, Black survivors of hate violence were 1.3 times more likely to experience police violence than their non-Black counterparts. Black survivors were also twice as likely to experience any physical violence, twice as likely to experience discrimination, and 1.4 times more likely to experience threats and intimidation during the act of hate violence. Additionally, Black transgender women face the highest levels of fatal violence within the LGBT community and are less likely to turn to police for help for fear of re-victimization by law enforcement personnel. According to the National Transgender Discrimination Survey, 38% of Black transgender people who interacted with police reported harassment. 14% reported physical assault from police, and 6% reported sexual assault. Such high rates of re-victimization by police is a major barrier to dealing with anti-transgender violence. That being said, the question is this to our panelists. Why do you feel that after all the advocacy and so-called human rights laws that have been put in place to help the LGBT community, is it so that they continue, or you continue, to be victimized by those who are supposedly there to help you? Any panelists, please feel free.
It go back to the homophobia. Being victimized. And I can share a personal experience. About 5 years ago, my ex-girlfriend and I had a fight She tried to stab me, and eventually wound up cutting her in the struggle. When the police came, they looked at her and wanted to lock me up. And I said, no, lock her up too. And then they say, no. You the one was being the man, and she's the woman. I wound up getting locked up. And they wound up bringing her too, because look, it's sick. I'm not going to do this by myself, but and the whole time they was just saying, look at these lesbians, look at them fighting. So a lot of people don't report it because of retaliation of the police. A heterosexual have a fight with his mate, they get different service than someone that's LGBT.
Bias, 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 bias. And the way that you deal with bias, whether it's race bias, transgender bias, homo bias, whatever, it's education.
Education.
And you got to get in the trenches with people.
That's right.
Because, you know, a symposia like this on a college campus is going to be fairly typical because people are socially aware, people are socially conscious. There has got to be an effort, and we are, just like we're training people on the stigma of mental illness, there's got to be a concerted effort to train people on LGBTQ bias. People need to know, I need to be going around to churches like I do now for the city for mental health first aid. I mean, there needs to be a training on homophobia.
That's right.
In the people of color community.
Yes.
And it needs to have the same, just like we have colleagues who are embedded at the police academy on mental health first aid because we got a mayor and a wife who put the money behind it.
That's right.
We need a mayor and a wife who put the money behind the issues of the stigma between homophobia. Because it is a problem.
It's a problem.
And people are dying. So I think that's the answer. Until that happens, this is just going to be a issue for academic research.
I think it's important to know that it was those trans women of color in the late 1960s who were at the forefront of the cafeteria riots and the Stonewall Rebellion. The only reason the LGBT community really has made advancements, hypothetically people have said this, is because the trans women of color were out there on the streets marching and rioting. And when you watch these movies like Stonewall, they don't have them in the movies.
Right.
So
Right.
What do you think that is?
There's that erasure again, right? There's that oppression, and that's why we then see the treatment by the police and things like that. You haven't talked about this. I'd be curious to know if you have anything to share about the how so many end up relying on sex work because they can't find work elsewhere, and therefore the right to sex work is sometimes very important to some trans people. And therefore we have this other situation at the confluence of law enforcement and trans people. Another situation that requires a lot more discussion in our country about what is right and what is wrong.
Well, certainly invalidating environments, violence, homophobia, all of those contextual stressors that a trans person or just someone in a marginalized community have to face, can, as you know, in your work as counselors, can certainly be risk factors for lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, lack of self-validating situations so that they can learn to put on a decent dress and go to an office and perhaps get a job. But because the transgender community has been over-sexualized, many, especially trans females, will rely on sex to make a living. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. And but it is certainly connected to issues of self-worthlessness, which, as we know, is a huge sign of depression.
Thank you, Greg. So we're going to wrap this up, but before we go, I wanted to give you guys at least 2 minutes to give us something to go with. You know, something that the audience could take back when we play our, you know, the live stream, that people can take with them. Just 2 minutes, or one word, or just a sentence.
Mine is learn to love.
Thank you, Greg.
Teach somebody to love. Learn to love. Because many people have learned to hate. We weren't born to be homophobic. We weren't born to be worried about what people will think, because whether we're femme or we're butch or somewhere in the middle. People, you need to remind people, you need to learn to love. Because there's a difference. You can learn to hate, you can learn to love.
Thank you, Greg.
Mine is equal rights. I want the same rights as everyone else and the same respect as everyone else. Don't judge me. Don't look at me no different. I will not judge you. I look at you any difference. Just equal rights as everyone else.
Thank you, Lamel.
I think about the words of another academic at the University, I believe, of Miami, and he reminds us that fairness is wellness. And therefore we have a responsibility to teach people how to be self-determined and how to empathize. Fairness equals wellness.
Like that.
Okay, so before you guys go, CSJ took it upon ourselves to give y'all a thank you gift, a parting gift. And as president of CSJ, I appreciate everything you guys came out to do for us today. And the education, like Greg, you said, education is key. We need education, and this is why we put this together. I also want to acknowledge our Vice President, Shanice. She came in today.
Shanice.
So, Sean did an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Mr. Rex Jones.
Yes.
He helped put this together. And I'm going to turn this over to Sean. To
Anthony Skerritt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anthony Skerritt, who's our secretary. I do apologize.
You're very helpful today.
To cut him out, but he was very helpful in this. I couldn't count on these guys if it wasn't for me or for them to put this together. So I do appreciate everyone that came out. We do have some food, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean, so Sean can close us out and we can eat and go home. Thank you.
You know, it's funny because, like, I'm a minister in my church, so I hear let's close us out on many occasions. Go home, minister, hug the close. On a serious note, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. I consider Rex Jones a big brother and a fellow soldier in the struggle. Natasha's awesome. Me and Shanice and Tony have been part of this thing since day one as well. I want to salute and give acknowledgement to one of my favorite teachers of all time, Dr. Wally in the back. Dr. Wally's the best. She really pushed me. I appreciate her very much. So with that being said, he knows it's coming. He knows it's coming. and yet he acts surprised.
All the time.
Every single time we do this, he acts surprised. We're going to call on the man I call the Chief Executive Officer of the CSG, Mr. Rex Jones.
Yes. Yes. Yes, he is.
Start sitting in the back. Okay, in closing out, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention Bayard Rustin. If anyone's familiar with Mr. Bayard Rustin, he was the individual who was responsible for the organization of the March on Washington, D.C. But like Professor Simons has said, because he was gay, he's not really acknowledged in history for that. He was actually at one point in time kicked off of Martin Luther King's team because Lyndon B. Johnson didn't like the fact that Bayard Rustin was getting a lot of media attention. So he threatened Martin Luther King that he would accuse him of sleeping with Bayard Rustin if he didn't kick him off the team. So he kicked Bayard Rustin off the team, but in order for the march to go forward, A. Philip Randolph has sent all the way to Kenya for Bayard Rustin to come back. If you want to learn more, you can watch the video called Brother Outside. The first time I saw it, I was really ashamed of the fact that I call myself very knowledgeable about history and not even know that there would have been no I Have a Dream speech if it wasn't for Bayard Rustin. And with that, God bless you. We have baked ziti and vegetables and water and plates and forks and napkins. So enjoy yourself. And we'll see you in December, Professor Wiley.